Person's words and actions this past week suggest to many a different story. A recent New York Times report looks at Trump's personal history with race, but how does his history square with his response to the Charlottesville tragedy? For more, I'm joined by a man who literally wrote a book, the book, on Donald Trump. David K. Johnston, author of The Making of Donald Trump. He is editor-in-chief of DCReport.org. David, thanks for taking a few minutes. Okay. So people saw Donald Trump give this sort of impromptu press conference earlier this week on Charlottesville, seemed to contradict the spirit of what he had said just the day before. And a lot of people, I think, looked up and said, where did it come from? You are somebody who's been covering him going back decades. Where did it come from?
It came from the heart, to the extent he has one, of Donald Trump. The earlier statement, which he read off a teleprompter, was like a hostage video. But you saw the real Donald come out in the second meeting, and Donald lives in this world where, you know, he says, I'm the least racist person you'll ever meet. Well, Steve, I'm the youngest person you've ever had on this show. Donald has his entire life been involved in discrimination, and he's been found to have done so. He and his father were sued 44 years ago for discrimination in housing. New Jersey casino regulators found that he discriminated against blacks, women, and Asians. And he's made all sorts of awful racist statements, including the stuff he said this week, which was full of vile racism.
Are his attitudes on race, this is a guy who's in his early 70s, 71 years old, I think. He's an outer borough guy here from New York City, Queens. Of course, people think of Queens. You go back a couple generations, people think of the famous television character Archie Bunker. Is that world, the world of people remember it from Archie Bunker, All in the Family, is that the world Trump came of age in?
Even worse than that. I mean, his father, remember, was arrested in 1927 when there was a pitched battle between about 1,000 KKKers, some of them in hoods, and 100 or so New York police. Trump makes a big deal out of the fact that his father wasn't prosecuted, he was only arrested. But he comes by this through family experience.
Well, Trump flirted with a run for president in 2000 as the Reform Party candidate. That was Ross Perot's party back then. Didn't last too long. He denounced rival Pat Buchanan as a neo-Nazi. Here's part of his explanation for why he dropped out of that race.
What do you see as the biggest problem with the Reform Party right now?
Well, you've got David Duke just joined, a big racist, a problem. I mean, this is not exactly the people you want in your party.
So, David, here's the thing that I'm a little confused by. Maybe you could shed some light on. If you go back in time to 1999 and 2000, Donald Trump essentially ran for president. He dropped out in early 2000, but he did all the things a candidate would do. And one of his major platform items that year was he was running against Pat Buchanan for this Reform Party nomination. And he was calling Pat Buchanan a racist. He was calling him anti-immigrant. He was calling him a Hitler lover. He was calling him an anti-Semite. And everything you just said about the other day, it sounded like a hostage video when he made his initial statement about Charlottesville. It didn't sound like a hostage video when he was saying those things about Pat Buchanan. What was the Donald Trump? Who was the Donald Trump we were hearing and seeing then? Because it sounded like it was genuinely coming from somewhere deep inside him.
Donald has no principles. There's no moral core to this man. He will say and do whatever gets what he thinks is in his interest at the moment. And Donald is at heart a con artist. He's conned banks into loaning him money and said later, I knew I wouldn't have to pay them back. He has conned people and many people in small businesses into doing work for him and then refusing to pay them. And he spent his whole life conning people. And if it turned out that tomorrow it would be good for Donald's career to go to a mosque, you'd see him do that. He does whatever in the moment he thinks will advance his interests, and he's not a strategic thinker, Steve. This is one of the most important things. He doesn't think ahead 2, 3, 5 steps. When he embraces the Wahhabi faction of the Muslim religion and his trip to Saudi Arabia, he doesn't think through at all what that means to others in the Muslim world, and particularly Qatar, where we have our most important military base in the Middle East. And all of that is because he doesn't know anything. He just has these instincts from which he operates.
It's a fascinating topic. We got to cut it short here, unfortunately, but it's one that we're going to find a way to explore at some point in the future. Donald Trump from 2000, the guy we just showed you, to today, and really to 2010 or so. what changed in terms of his instinct for what was in his best interest? If he says it's transactional, as you're saying here, I'm curious about that story of what happened between 2000 and 2010 to get him from the guy who condemns Pat Buchanan to the guy who becomes a birther, because it is, whatever else you say,
the country moved to the right, Steve. That's the big part of it. It moved to the right, and he saw opportunity, and Donald went after that opportunity.
All right, there it is.